Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts.
Only a few days before Christmas, on December 20th, 1879, a Cree Native American man named Swift Runner was participating in Alberta, Canada's first official death by hanging. He was found guilty of not only murdering his entire family, but eating them as well. But Swift Runner maintained his innocence, saying that he was not the one who'd committed the crimes, but it was that of the evil spirit known as the Wendigo. My name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Hello and welcome to tonight's show. The word Wendigo appears in many Native American languages and has many alternative translations. The Wendigo is part of the traditional belief system of a number of Algonquin-speaking peoples, which include the Cree. And our subject tonight is part of the Cree tribe, named Swift Runner. He was born in Alberta as Kakisi Kuchin. My apologies if I mispronounced that. Swift Runner was a popular man in the Cree community and a father of 6 children. Other descriptions of him were that he stood over 6 feet tall and made his living as a trapper and as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. But over time, Swift Runner developed a taste for whiskey and fell into the throes of alcoholism. Making things worse, Swift Runner was an angry drunk, and his drinking habits got him into trouble an awful lot. He did lose his ability to hunt and therefore take care of his family. He was also fired by the police force and was kicked out of his tribe thanks to his violent tendencies. In the winter of 1878, Swift Runner took his family, his wife, 6 children, his mother-in-law, and brother out into the forest. Several months later, as spring rolled around, Swift Runner staggered out of the woods into a nearby Catholic mission. When the priest asked him what was wrong, Swift Runner said his entire family was dead. He described that during the winter he hadn't been able to find any food, and slowly all of his relatives had starved to death. The priests were suspicious. Swift Runner looked plenty healthy, looked like he hadn't skipped any meals. How come he didn't succumb to starvation? Not to mention, other Cree members of the tribe had plenty successful winter hunting-wise. The priests were also disturbed by Swift Runner's constant nightmares. The man would wake up in the night screaming at the top of his lungs. The last straw was when Swift Runner tried to lead a group of children out into the woods. Convinced he killed his entire family, the priests sent to the authorities. The police put Swift Runner under arrest and ordered the big man to lead them to the winter campsite which they stayed. Sources disagree on what exactly happened the next day. Some say Swift Runner immediately took them to the spot. However, other reports online suggest that he was just doing that to mislead them, only cooperating after he was made drunk. Anyway, when the group eventually stumbled upon the campsite, what they found was truly horrifying. Bones were strewn everywhere, some broken in half and hollowed out. Something had snapped them open and sucked out the marrow. Their suspicions were confirmed when they found a pot full of human fat. That's when Swift Runner pulled the Wendigo defense. According to Swift Runner, he'd been possessed by the evil spirit. Then he said he murdered and eaten his entire family. But as you might expect, they didn't believe him. Swift Runner went to trial in 1879, and the jury didn't buy his supernatural tale, and only spent around a half hour deliberating, and they sentenced that man to death. The Wendigo is a big part of the traditional belief system of a number of Algonquin-speaking peoples, including that of the Cree. Although most descriptions vary, common in all these cultures view the Wendigo as a malevolent, cannibalistic, supernatural being. They were also strongly associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. In Eastern Cree, Wendigos were often described as giants that are many times the size of humans, a characteristic absent from myths with other Algonquin cultures. Whenever a Wendigo ate another person, it would grow in the proportion to its meal that it had just eaten, so it would never be full. Therefore, Wendigos were usually portrayed as something simultaneously gluttonous and extremely thin due to starvation. The Wendigo was seen as an embodiment of gluttony, greed, and excess. Never satisfied after killing. Never once. They were always constantly searching for new victims. A Wendigo needed to not lose the human's power of cognition or speech. And in some depictions, many clearly communicate with its prospective victims, or even threaten them and taunt them. A specimen of folk story collected in the early 20th century says that a Wendigo also used tools and other abilities to survive partial dismemberment and auto-cannibalism. In some traditions, humans overpowered by greed could be turned into Wendigos. The myth thus serves as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Other sources say Wendigos are created when a human resorts to cannibalism to survive. Humans can also turn into Wendigos by being in contact with them for too long. Now, in researching the Wendigo itself, it seems a lot of Native Americans already understand conceptually what the Wendigo is. Basically, as a concept, a Wendigo can apply to literally any person, idea, or movement infected by a corrosive drive toward greed or excessive consumption. And Swift Runner was eventually executed on December 20th, 1879. He was the first man legally hanged in Alberta, Canada. Before his death, the man converted to Catholicism, and moments before the trapdoor dropped, he gave a speech admitting his guilt. At which point, he hanged to death in Fort Saskatchewan that day. Historical accounts diagnose Wendigo psychosis as being reported that humans become possessed by the Wendigo spirit after being in a situation of needing food and having no other choice besides cannibalism. Many recorded cases of Wendigo psychosis involves an individual that had been killed to prevent cannibalism from resulting. In some Cree folklore, recommends that treatment needed to be ingestion of fatty animal meats, drinking animal grease, and those treated may sometimes vomit ice as a part of the curing process. After Swift Runner was executed, he was not seen as a case of pure cannibalism as a last resort to avoid starvation, but rather a man with Wendigo psychosis. Now, at that time, it was even hotly debated whether Wendigo psychosis was a mere fabrication. As a result, many naive anthropologists taking stories relating to them at face value without any observation. Others pointed to a number of other credible eyewitness accounts, both Algonquins and others, as evidence that Wendigo psychosis was a factual historical phenomenon. It doesn't change the fact that the frequency of Wendigo psychosis cases decreased sharply in the 20th century when it became greater and greater contact with European ideologies and a more sedentary, less rural lifestyle. So there you have it. Another story where a spooky monster of the supernatural was unmasked, determined to be a normal man who committed atrocities. I thank you very much for listening to tonight's show. I would much love some feedback from all of my listeners out there. Please leave a comment on your favorite podcast provider. Also, please share this with others if you like my content. And please consider sharing it so I can get more listeners, so I can continue to be making these podcasts. Again, thank you so much for listening. I hope everyone has a good evening. My name is DJ, and this was the Mythical True Crime Podcast. See you next week. Bye.
And that concludes another captivating episode, delving into the world of mythical true crime. I appreciate you joining me tonight as we listen to the facts from these true crime tales. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll uncover even more mysteries. Until then, thank you for listening to tonight's episode. Good night.